I call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order.
Not ready yet.
Okay.
Okay, we're all eager.
I'm gonna approve a lot of minutes. I call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. This is a special meeting. I have moved to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated August 8th, 2022.
Second, Maya.
All those in favor? Motion carries 7-0. I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated August 22nd, 2022.
Second, Maya.
All those in favor? Motion carries 7-0. I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated September 6th, 2022.
Second, Nikki.
All those in favor? Aye.
I'm jumping in on the next one.
All right.
I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated September 19th, 2022.
Second, Nichelle Nichols.
All those in favor, aye. Motion carries 7-0. I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated December 2nd, 2022.
Again, Chris.
All those in favor, aye. Motion carries 7-0.
Lori,
We are gonna have a conversation this evening to talk about the recent announcement of our superintendent's retirement and the process of engaging in the next superintendent search, including our options and timeline. And I've asked Barb Osborne to join us tonight because she was our board secretary for 29 years. And she was available to 12 different transitions over the course of that time. So nobody knows this process from the MMSD perspective better than Barb, and nobody's been closer to it than she has. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Barb. Before you take us through kind of timeline and Ashed, so nice to see you.
Hi, Barb. Hello, everyone.
Like there's nothing like hanging out with you at 8 o'clock on a Monday night.
Yeah. I know you'd rather not be doing anything other than this.
Yes, I'm like, this is, that's why you came out of retirement to hang out with us. So thank you. But before we get started, it's come to our attention that several members of the community did not see the board statement. I want to thank Board Member Gomez-Schmidt and Board Member Pearson for working pretty intensely and really quickly on the statement drafted by the board and working with fellow board members to ensure that the sentiment exchanged was something that we could all be in favor of and behind in terms of what it means to recognize the retirement of our superintendent. So, Board Member Pearson, do you mind reading that statement?
Yeah, so we sent out the statement on February 8th, 2023, as an official statement from the Board of Education. As Ali mentioned, we had heard that it was brought to our attention that many in the community had not heard us or seen our statement. So it is as follows. The board would like to express our gratitude for Superintendent Dr. Jenkins' leadership and commitment to MMSD scholars, families, staff, and community. We have a profound respect for all he has given to our district. He returned to MMSD at the height of the pandemic and led our district through a time of incredible uncertainty. He unified our community to pass 2 historic referendums, championed our investment in early literacy, raised the graduation rate, and maintained our commitment to addressing disparities and improving educational outcomes for all scholars. In the coming days, the board will be meeting to determine the next steps in our process to find our next superintendent. We are grateful to continue working in collaboration with Dr. Jenkins as we prioritize our scholars, families, educators, and staff during this time of transition. And here we are those days later after this statement was made. Back to you, Ali.
Thank you so much, Board Vice President Pearson. I also want to acknowledge that, there is a lot of love and respect for Dr. Jenkins in this room right now. And as we navigate this process, I think we want to do our best to be as thoughtful and considerate towards his continued leadership. And so I'm very grateful that we have the next few months to work collaboratively with our superintendent to really make this transition as smooth as possible in consideration of our educators and our principals and our students. And I hope that we're able throughout this conversation to prioritize the needs of our young people and our educators and our principals and the folks that, you know, need to be heard throughout this process in order for us to do it well. With that being said, I want to turn it over to Barb, if that's all right. I hear Member Vandermeulen.
Technically, although Dr. Jenkins has retired, we never accepted the retirement. And as a board, I think that just as a next step for formality wise, I think we need to acknowledge that we accept it as a board.
I greatly appreciate that, Nikki, and I will, you know, look to our general counsel to guide us through that process. I do want to remind board members that personnel issues, even personnel issues specific to our superintendent, are not public matters. They're navigated in closed session. And so with a great deal of respect for our superintendent's privacy, I think we need to move forward in a conversation that is oriented to what we are noticed for tonight, is to talk about the process.
Just wanted to make sure it was part of that process. That's the reason I raised it. I appreciate it.
Barb, do you want to take it away?
Hey, everybody. So I'm just going to direct you to the documents that I know Jesse made available in board docs for this. And I can share my screen too, because I do want you to see that. We've been through this pretty recently. So the one thing that there's a couple things here I'd like you to see. One, we do already have an RFP and it's dated 2012, but these things are pretty standard. And so there's all kinds of things that we can draw on from what we've already done in the past. And I know that Sherry is perfectly, you know, she's capable and ready to get an RFP out there to start getting some search firms in place for you to choose from. The one thing I really want to emphasize, I think right at the beginning is, yeah, I've been through this a few times, but I do know that the people who directly supported the search firms in this process most recently was Mike Herding and Deidre Fargo-Krieghoff. So I'm just letting you know that those are the people that were most recently involved. Every time that we have done this, the chief of staff has been directly involved. I think this is a little bit of a different situation, and I think with the workloads of everybody at the Doyle Administration Building, I highly recommend that we talk to somebody who's been through it and recently, and somebody who would be just working on this work stream, because it is very taxing. There's a lot to it, and you really need somebody to work hand in hand with the search firm once they are decided on. I know that there's a lot of options with timelines on this, and I have talked to Ali a little bit about you know, the desire to have an interim or not have an interim. Not having an interim means that you are going to be catapulting yourself into this, and along with that, your staff and you know, everybody else that's involved in it. So while I'm not going to say that it can't be done, I'm going to say that trying to do this without an interim step in between is not advisable. It's just the thing that you really want to focus on, I think, especially in this kind of thing, where I'm sure that Dr. Jenkins would like a nice smooth transition. It's very helpful to the Doyle building in particular to have somebody steering the ship while this is going on, and so that they know that their jobs and their current work streams are going to continue on, and that everything is going to be fine, and it will evolve as things go on. I think speeding it up puts the people that you're working with in a situation where the quality of it may not be what you would like. in the end because of going a little bit too fast. But I think the process can be done quite well in a period of 7 to 8 months. It doesn't have to be a year. Nobody wants to have it go on any longer than it has to. But a period of 8 months is something that I would recommend, because I see that most of the time when we've done this, that's about what it's taken. There's so many facets to it that that take a certain amount of time. Just getting the position description out there and having it out there long enough, and giving the search firms time to work their networks to try to find an acceptable match. All that takes time. And I wonder how people will look at it if we try to speed it up too much when a superintendent is looking at a new school district to move to. They want to see something that's moving along quickly, but not too fast. So I think they'll be watching everything that you do from now until the time that the superintendent is chosen. And even once that happens, then there's a lot of community stuff that you do at the end, you introducing the person or persons who are vying for the top spot. And there's all kinds of ways that we do that. And in Madison, that takes a little bit of time, because we try to reach all the people that we know want to be involved in that. So the documents again here that she provided for you, I definitely would take a look at those if I were you, but I'm just going to pull up that timeline here that we followed the last couple of times. So it really does a good job of giving you a good idea of how long everything takes. And what's involved. So, getting down to the nitty gritty of what the rubric is going to like for scoring people, and just, picking the right firm. I mean, that takes time. So, and there's a lot of people involved. So I would take a look at that if I were you, before you make a final decision about whether you want to do an interim or not. I do know that one of the very first steps that we started with always was to see internally who had the credentials to do an interim job. So you have to have a superintendent's license to hold that job. So that's one of the first things that HR would probably do for us. But again, I think, Tracy and Sherry and Dr. McGregory, all pretty new to this. So I think, having somebody who's been through it before, especially in Madison, would be very highly beneficial for everybody throughout. So I guess I would like to know what your questions are, because it's always the same process. There's nothing strange about it. Nothing happens in the middle of it, but a lot of it is really guided by the system, and then we support them as much as we possibly can throughout.
Thank you so much, Barb Osborne. I see Board Member Vandermeulen has a question.
Yes, actually, my question is more of a statement. We've worked well with Dr. Jacobs with collaboration, and I'd like to think we could do so in this process as well. So I was hoping that we could be even more involved. That I've been on here 6 years, that we could be even more involved to help with the decision making, as HR is doing a ton, our lawyer is doing a ton, Dr. Jacobs is doing a ton. Please don't hesitate to at least ask board members to be even more involved if you need. Not all of us can always do that, but some of us can, and I'd be glad to volunteer to do that. But also, just realize, Barb, you're the expert. You're the one who's gone through 12 of these. I haven't. I've gone through 3. What am I on? 3? 3. I've gone through 3. But I do want the board just to be very in the loop, because I think it'll just help with the collaborative process. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for those comments, Board Member Vandermeulen. Further questions, folks, around the process, timeline, or best practice? Board Member Gomez Schmidt.
Yeah, Barb, thank you for gathering all these materials and for speaking with us. I guess one of my questions is just the timeframe we find ourselves in. These searches that you've done before have been starting at different times in the calendar year. Can you speak a little bit about the time we're in? We're in February. Obviously the school year ends and then we go into a new school year in August and September. What is the general trend with school districts looking for superintendents? Or is that something more specific we would have to ask a search firm?
Yep, they're gonna have a better idea about that, Chris. It's gonna happen at different times of the year. The cycle for superintendents, they're probably looking right now for where they want to be placed in the fall. So it's not a terrific time to be looking, but it's okay. I mean, everybody knows that it's gonna be off kilter and an off cycle, but you just never know what you're gonna get for people that are out there looking when you post something like this, especially for a school district like Madison, because we're a very popular spot to be. No matter what people, no matter what is going on, this is still a very desirable place to be.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for highlighting that, Barb. And I think, the competitiveness of us posting, this position and, but I am very curious about the timeline and sort of weighing the costs and benefits of our two different options. So I'll look forward to reviewing the materials and coming up with some additional questions.
I do want to say that I think Dr. Jenkins, I'm sure, is talking to people about possible interim stuff and he's thinking about how he wants to make the transition too. So I'm sure that he will be communicating that to the board president.
Barb, I want to ask you, are there mistakes that you think board members want to be careful about in terms of engaging in this process? Are there kind of do's and don'ts for how board members should engage with this process? Things that you've seen backfire, things that you've seen work really well?
I have to say that the professionalism of the search firms, and depending on who you choose, they've all done an outstanding job, and they've all been very, very willing to listen to the board members and to the community and to engage everybody. That's part of what takes the time. But I've never seen anything backfire except when you get right down to the end and everything is crazy and you've got maybe 5 or 3 people who are vying for this spot. There's a lot of legal stuff involved about what you can and can't say and what you can and can't do at that point. And you may have somebody checking out when you weren't expecting that. And so I would just be, just have that in the back of your head that can happen at any time during the process. And you may have to go back and look at candidates more than once because of that. So, they have their own situation, their own personal lives and where they're located and all of that. And, the confidentiality involved with getting a superintendent is you have to keep that at the very front of your mind. These people are changing their lives for you and for the school district, and we have to respect them at all times during the entire process. So if they decide to pull out at the last minute, okay, that's how it rolls. But no, I haven't seen anything happen in a bad way at all. No, it's everybody gets well vetted. The search firms are really, really good about who they're talking to and how they present them to the board. There's all kinds of processes involved and they know what they are.
Board Member Nichols?
Thank you. From what you compiled for us, Barb, it seems like one of the first steps is us deciding that we are indeed moving forward with a search firm. And then updating the RFP language accordingly. Would you also say that that is one of the first kind of steps or decisions this board needs to make?
That and whether or not you want to do an interim, yes.
Okay.
At the same time, they can very definitely be happening at the same time, yes.
Okay. Thank you. So for Board President Muldrow, where might we be making that first decision? Is that in a like workshop like this? Is it in a different setting?
So that is an excellent question, and
Okay.
because a request for proposals is similar to a competitive bidding process, that would be a closed session where the board would really refine what we're asking of folks. And also, you know, we would be reviewing who ends up submitting to us in a more confidential process as well. Barb, is that correct in terms of your understanding of?
Yeah, there's no, right, we don't talk about names of people or anything like that until we're fully ready for that. And some of that is being done internally right now, so.
What do you
Yeah,
mean?
so we never talk about names of people or anything like that until we're ready and in closed session. These open sessions are all about process and yeah, what's the next step for sure.
Barb, quick question. What do you mean it's going on internally right now?
I'm saying, Nikki, that the superintendent and, you know, is thinking about how he wants to make this transition out. And I'm sure that he is talking to his staff and talking to Board President Muldrow for sure about, you know, what do you think, where do you think the board is leaning about whether or not they want to do an interim, and does he have anybody in mind to recommend? And is there anybody that are possible human resources staff? Is there anybody that you want them to reach out to who has the credentials to do such a thing?
Thank you for the questions, Board Member Nichols. Do you have any more questions at this
Sorry,
time?
sure.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I want to make sure I understand. So as I'm hearing you, Barb, first kind of important two decisions we need to make is around going to RFP for a search firm. And also within some timeline of the search and hiring process, also thinking about whether we want an interim.
Yes.
Okay, so for the first decision, well, I'm calling it first, it may not be the first, but one of our early decisions around going to an RFP so that we can actually initiate the search firm process. I guess I'm still not clear, like, where does that decision get made? Does it get made in an open session like tonight by somebody making a motion? Do we go into a closed session at some other point and we're doing I think that's what's unclear to me, or is it just assumed we are moving forward with an RFP and a search firm?
Sherry can respond to that.
I think I
Okay.
hear what you're asking. And I think the end of your question is actually the question, right? So, I mean, it comes down to two things. If you're not employing a search firm, that means the board is doing the search themselves with the help of somebody internally, whoever that person would be. I would not advise that. And the reason we go to RFP is because board policy says that anything over a certain dollar threshold, which this would be, has to go to RFP. And then, so once that's done, we put out the RFP for the board. The board really, those RFPs really don't change for one simple reason, because as the vendors start to decide that they want to participate in the process, there's a question and answer period that they go through and the board goes through with them, as far as if they have additional questions about process or who they'll be reporting to or anything like that. Those questions will be fleshed out, and then the board will receive packets with all of the information for each vendor that has decided to throw their names in the hat. And the board needs to go through the rubric. And I would say one of the steps would be for the board to look at the rubric that I think Jesse gave you, because that was the one we used the last time. And that will give you an idea of sort of what at that time the board was looking for with regard to a search firm, and think about, are these the same things that we want? Because you have to have that rubric before you start evaluating the responses.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Sherry. So what I hear you saying is it's not so much that we have to make the decision. It's kind of assumed that because we all don't work for the district full-time, that we would want a search firm to actually help us in this process. And so it sounds like it's a matter of us looking at maybe the last version of the RFP language, making sure that it still represents what we would be looking for in a search firm, and then you all send it out.
Yes, and it's not so much what you're looking for, because that's pretty standard. It's more
Okay.
looking at the rubric.
The evaluation rubric.
Right, because the board will be doing that evaluation. The closest example I can think of that's been before the board is those items that Cedric has brought to the board, saying this is for transportation, for example. So his team has evaluated it. So the board will be the team evaluating based on whatever rubric they establish.
Okay,
And that's
thank you for
one
that.
part of the process too. I'm sorry, may I? That's the major part of the process, but then those people that are like in the top 3 actually meet and do a presentation to the board about
Okay.
what they would offer. So you get to see them and know who they are.
Thank you.
Not about that part, but thank you, Barb. I see Board Member Pearson and then Board Member Vandermeulen, you're on deck.
Yeah, so kind of centering back to the timeline, and then I think also Nichelle, somewhat what you were trying to get at. It's just then what the next, so now we're meeting, we're getting the process of kind of where our timeline of like where we would like to be at, ensure that there's a seamless handoff. And so the next question for me is then, now that we're kind of talking about it, what should we do next? Do we want to start doing the RFP? Is that if the RFP then is, done, like how, like, are we gonna be, again?
The RFP and the rubric are the things that the board needs to move forward in adjusting.
And that will be in closed session, yeah. Is my guess.
So Sherry, would our next meeting be to meet in closed session to discuss the rubric and the RFP?
Well, we can put out the RFP for the board, which is how it's run. It's run through the procurement department. It's like choosing any other vendor. I don't see why the board would go outside of that process. Putting out the RFP is just basically asking people to submit their proposals of interest. And then as Barb indicated, you'd have your rubric, but then the board also has to think about how they want to narrow it down and then start scheduling those meetings. And I think that's where Barb's suggestion that, someone be brought in to help that usher that part along a little bit would be key. I did take a look at board docs for the last time this happened. And so at every critical step, just so the board members who weren't involved are aware, more often than not, the board was meeting almost every night in a week.
We had
And
a
so
whole
I
pizza,
think-
For sure.
we had a whole pizza schedule.
Yeah, so I want to make sure everyone is aware that, you need to probably start looking at your calendars. Typically for RFPs, we leave it out for a month to give people time to respond. I know we've already gotten at least one email to the board, and I've heard from outside counsel that the board can expect many more emails from search firms. So I think putting out the RFP will help stop those emails, because they're told that once the RFP is put out, no one should be individually contacting the board. And so then it's all fair, it's all open, and you won't be getting those emails from search firms. But that's not necessary. The rubric is not necessarily, we can do it in closed session, but first I would say the board members need to look at the one that was put out in the past, because it may be that you're okay with that one. And then we can talk about next steps after you review it.
Okay, so then getting to my question, it takes about a month to leave it open for the RFP for folks to then bid. So if we're thinking about time frame, if we're thinking about based off of like our kind of conceptualized timeline, right? Then we want to make sure that we probably get it in maybe like this week or next week. So that we have that full month to kind of get the ball rolling. But it sounds like we don't necessarily need the full board, so maybe that's just a conversation then with our president and Sherry to make sure that that gets started.
I thought we would use the whole board on that. May I just speak on experience on this one?
So I see board member Nichols' hand up, but you were already on deck.
Thank you. You're next.
Okay, I wasn't trying to cut anyone off.
No, you're not.
No, you're good.
Um,
I'm done.
The last time we did this, the hardest thing was when information wasn't presented to everyone as much as possible, because we didn't know who knew what, when. That was right after Jen. That was really hard, and some of us remember it. Some of us don't, but that was harder.
Only two of us over here, Nikki.
Okay.
You're looking at me.
Okay, sorry. I can't remember which year is what.
I'm just
The
saying.
pandemic messed with my timeline. But very simply, it was very unsafe. Anyway. I digress. What I'm saying is that it gets confusing of what information can be shared among the groups and what can't. So I'd suggest that if we're gonna do it, we should do them as board decisions as much as possible, just so that way we don't have confusion over, am I allowed to speak on that issue? Does this person know, am I legally allowed to tell this person? Which can cause a heck of a lot of confusion and also a lot of mistrust of, are they doing it? And it can get ugly.
Thank you, board member Van I will definitely take that into consideration, board member.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just looking at the RFP from 2019, which would be the most recent one. I'm wondering if one of our next steps should be to review section 1.1, introduction and background, 1.2 scope. Yeah, and maybe provide in the next day or so, any suggested edits that could be incorporated. Since the rest of, I think the RFP would probably be standard. So that might be one way that we could proceed after tonight. And then, and so we should probably be clear about who those suggested edits should go to. I don't know if they're coming to you as board president or if they would go in directly to Sherry, but anyway, we should probably be clear on that. The only other thing I noticed in this RFP that maybe Sherry, you could speak to is if you look at attachment F in the RFP, attachment F is the superintendent's search process and timeline. And it was very detailed. And so I guess I'm wondering two things. Thank you for coming back on. One, if we had any slight suggested edits for scope and the intro and background, how do you prefer we send those in? And secondly, can you talk a little bit about the attachment so that the prospective vendors kind of know what they're exactly responding to and how do we build out this timeline piece?
So I think probably the best way to do it is build out based on what Barb, adjust the dates on what Barb showed on the screen for the timeline, because we know that timeline worked. My fear is if we get too far off of that timeline and try to speed it up or slow it down because we might not necessarily know the implications, we might be setting ourselves up for something that we don't want to happen. So that would be my suggestion. Just work off of, you know, the timeline that Barb has, pick a starting date, and that would be the date that I could have the RFP out, you know, after I see if there are any other suggestions for scope. And then the only other thing, and I had, board member Simkin had asked, about a little bit about the process. If the board is going to do an interim, the board could be working on that, while the RFP is out.
Okay,
I did talk to Dr. Jenkins before this meeting, and I want to acknowledge that I asked Dr. Jenkins if this process takes, 7 to 8 months, as Barb outlined, would he be willing to stay on so that we could avoid an interim and have a smoother transition between him and our new administration, our new superintendent? And he did say he was open to that. So that does not confirm his willingness, that does not commit his willingness, but he is interested in having that conversation with us. Should our timeline necessitate that, or should that be an approach that we all agree best serves our community and our students? And so I'm very grateful to Dr. Jenkins for being open to delaying his retirement. I feel bad for people who try to retire from MMSD. You always end up still working for MMSD, Barb. But I greatly appreciate that Dr. Jenkins did let me know I could share that with you all this evening. He is open to that as something that we can explore as an option.
So that to me would be a unique situation. That's a wonderful thing. I mean, we're we want to be here to support you all through this. I don't want anybody to panic. There's no reason to do that, especially given what you just heard. Yeah, but if you get somebody on board who can handle the work stream for you and get these communications out and make sure that you're all involved in everything, and the communications is the number one priority for all of this, so everybody's on the same page all the time. Yeah, so you're in a good position.
That makes sense to me. So Sherry, I want to ask specifically, are you already engaged in a process of drafting an RFP and creating it so that the board can review that? And then what's the timeline for getting that out and opening the window for folks to submit proposals?
So I can be, I think based on what board member Nichols has indicated, I know that first section about Madison and the school district has been updated since 2019. So I can make sure that we have the updated information for that. And then as far as the scope, I can take a look, make suggestions to the board, or I can wait for the board to make suggestions to me. I don't know which would be easiest.
My preference would be that you take a look, make suggestions to the board. I do think if all 7 of us are sending you our suggestions, that could become a pretty intensive process in and of itself. That's my opinion. I'm open to what other folks think.
I appreciate that.
I'm fine with that.
An open records nightmare if we did it the other way, so.
Yeah, I like
So I'm
that.
hearing from board members and seeing head nods that Sherry, we very much appreciate that you can take the lead on that, get it back to us. Could you give us a little bit of a timeline for that?
So I probably could have it done by next week, Thursday.
Thank you for that, Sherry. That's an incredible level of efficiency. So we appreciate it greatly. The whole RFP, I think, is what you're saying. Are you saying you can review it, get us back what you think the adjustments are, or you can get us adjusted for?
Well, pretty much the rest of the RFP is standard language. So it would just be giving you the updated language for that part and giving you the most updated language on the first section about Madison.
Jerry and Barb, I want to ask you both a question about how we engage both the community in this process transparently, but also how we engage local media in this process. How we equip the press that is going to tell this story with us, to make sure that it is covered accurately, and also that we are that the folks who are reporting on this are prepared for the portions of it that are confidential.
I think Tim Lamont is gonna be a key player in the whole situation. Definitely, he will be, I'm sure he's getting approached by people already about it. No doubt about it, but the lines between what we can't say and what we can say are pretty much dictated by the search firm once we get them going. And, you know, Ali, you can use the board president's announcements to give the public a little tidbit of every a bit of progress that we're making, so you can always speak there. And also Tim will be involved directly.
I greatly appreciate that, and I do think that the community's ability to anticipate that at our regular meetings, they will get updates on this process throughout this process, is a nice way to maintain transparency, and also for folks to know there is a designated time and location for that conversation, versus kind of having it, you know, every day, everywhere. Other questions folks have for Barb or Sherry, in terms of the timeline of the overall process? If folks are feeling good about the conversation we're having, I think we're ready to move on to next steps. I'm comfortable with us adjourning. There's a few folks we haven't heard from, so I want to make sure that if you haven't gotten to chime in, we hear from you. And Barb, I see your hand up.
I just want to make one more point, board. Remember that you're in the middle of your budget situation anyway. You know that this is gonna take a little bit, so you'll get estimates on the cost for these when the RFP goes out, but just, you know, keep that in the back of your mind. This is gonna be a separate work stream in the budget for sure.
I think that's a really good and realistic reminder, because I think we just had a conversation about the budget and nobody asked, hey, how will the superintendent search factor in? So I think we need to follow up with the reality of the fact that the search has a cost and a material reality to it. Thanks for that, Barb. Any other questions or comments? Sorry. Sherry, I'm curious, are you planning to follow up with us in email?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sherry, for being specific about the timeline and the process. And I think we need to develop now is kind of what our schedule is going to look like for this process. Although I think that is a conversation that we can have as informed by the RFP, given the timeline that we're initiating right now. Unless folks want to comment on the timeline specifically.
As long as it's not April 4th, I'm fine.
Right.
My only comment is based on what I heard Sherry say tonight. If we were to start the timeline on attachment F, RFP draft complete. If we now insert 2/23/23, based on Sherry, you saying that you think you could have, you know, the next version ready by next Thursday, then it looks like we would start building out the timeline
From 2/23.
from 2/23.
And
Sure.
then I would be working with Kenneth and in procurement. It's likely that he wouldn't post it until Monday, the 27th. And then it'll go out to everyone after the board has reviewed it. So if there are more changes, then we may have to push that date a little, depending on.
So,
Okay.
and would the board need to, we don't need to vote. We just need to vote on the proposal. So I'm like, we should be fine after that.
Yeah, because what I see in the timeline is board feedback and finalization.
Okay.
5 days after the draft is ready, and then 7 days later it's posted. I don't know if we need all of that, but
Yeah, the
who
7
is
days was
actually replacing the
probably,
dates in the timeline?
The 7 days was probably because the board review was like a Thursday. And so
Okay.
then it is 7 days because then you post it on Monday.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Vandermillen?
Yes, I had met earlier with Chris, just on whether or not we need a job description. We have a leadership profile, but we don't have a formal job description. And would that help?
So I want to pause because we don't have a leadership profile. The leadership profile was generated from community feedback. So we're not going to use the same community feedback we used before the pandemic, 3 years
Oh,
ago,
good point.
to do this process. We are going to have to engage in the process in its entirety.
Okay,
Okay,
never mind then, but the job description still might be helpful.
I completely agree with that, but I think that's.
It is, yes, it's separate. The search firm will work with you on your leadership profile.
On the leadership profile, exactly. Because it has to be updated for every situation.
Further discussion? Member Gomez Schmidt?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we briefly touched on this being a cost, but I think we need to look at it as an investment, because this is the process by which we're going to select the next leader for this district and is going to be one of the most important decisions that the board makes in the next year.
I absolutely agree. Thanks. Further discussion? Board members, I thank you very much for participating in this conversation. I know it's been a long night. Barb, thank you for joining us
Thank
for
you,
old
Barb.
time's sake late in the evening on a Monday.
Miss you.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor, aye. Special meetings adjourned. Thanks, y'all.
Ollie,
Yes.
maybe, want to know what
Ask me anything, board member Vandermillen.